in 1987 when the team was ranked #1 in the world. As a lawyer, he won several major jury verdicts in gender discrimination and race discrimination trials. And as an environmentalist, he played a leading role in crafting landmark water reforms in 2009 and authored dozens of successful environmental bills in the State House before he went on to Congress. In Congress, he chairs the Natural Resources Subcommittee on Water, Oceans, and Wildlife, among other work. And he lives here in San Rafael with his wife, Susan, who's a teacher, and they have 2 children, Abby and Nathan. Congressman Huffman, the floor is yours. Welcome. Are you muted?
There we go. I think I'm unmuted.
Yes.
And Paul, let me thank you for that generous introduction. I think the statute of limitations on me being able to call myself an athlete has long since expired, but makes me feel good nevertheless to hear that I used to be one. Right now, I'm a congressman at an incredible moment, I think, in history on so many levels, but certainly it's a challenging time for all of us. And so I want to thank everybody involved with the Chamber of Commerce and these communities that are represented here tonight. I think you're doing a terrific job maintaining critical advice and support and advocacy for a business community that is reeling. And I want you to know that I get that. We're dealing simultaneously with a public health pandemic unlike anything we've ever seen, and an economic collapse unlike anything we've ever seen. And obviously the two are very intertwined. I thought it was interesting how the results of your poll question reflected almost a co-equal status in the level of concern between those two things. I think that's a very accurate take on how people are viewing this. So I won't spend too much time talking about what Congress has already done. You're familiar with the various enactments that we have made, both in pushing a lot of money, frankly, out the door to address the public health side of this, but also a really unprecedented attempt to keep the lights on for small businesses. The CARES Act framework is something now that we've had a chance to think about and look at for the past 2 months or so. And you're familiar, of course, with the Paycheck Protection Program and with the EIDL loan and the EIDL grant program. So again, I won't go too much into that, but I think it's pretty obvious that the goal of these tools is to see if we can find a way to keep your employee relationships intact, keep people on the payroll for as long as possible, so that if and when we come out of this lockdown from the pandemic, more of the economy is intact. You all can be closer to flipping a switch and going back to business as usual. I will say that as important as that goal is, the further we get into this public health crisis, I think the more we have to ask ourselves whether that premise of an immediate rebound where we can just turn businesses and turn the economy back on, whether that is really going to be the case for a lot of regions, for a lot of businesses. I'm sure you've begun to think about that too. And I've heard about it from the businesses I represent, because when they think about a commitment to the PPP program, for example, many of them don't know if 10 weeks down the road they're going to be able to honor that commitment and maintain their payroll, especially if they're restaurants or in the hospitality business. It's just not hard to imagine a number of these businesses taking a much longer period to actually get back to full strength. So as I think about how effective this tool is, I'm mindful of that reality. And I'm thinking a lot about whether we need to provide something that's a longer term, much more durable basis of support. I'm also concerned about inefficiency and abuse, quite honestly. You know, building a $350 billion program that depends on banks as a middleman to sort of use their discretion to get these loans out to the people that they can choose to give them to may not be the most efficient way to get help to the places that need it most. It may invite abuse. We have read the stories of abuse. We're familiar with some of that, although we don't necessarily even have a full picture of it because we haven't been able to get the reporting to do the oversight. So I'm all for continuing to support the PPP program. We've done that. We've added several $100 billion more money when it ran out, and we knew there was more demand. But I'm also really interested in moving to different models if we have the opportunity to do that. I'm pretty close to co-sponsoring a different model, a bill that would follow the track that the UK and some other European countries have gone down, where they do cut out the middleman of the banks and they just provide direct payroll assistance to companies. I would want to see, obviously, a threshold demonstration that they're suffering losses. I don't want to take over the payroll for Amazon or others that are going to be doing just fine during this pandemic. But I think that direct payroll coverage is more efficient. It's proving out in other countries to work a little bit better, and it avoids some of the chaos and frustrations that we've seen from the banks as the middleman. So I just wanted to share that with you as some bigger picture considerations and debates right now that are going on in Congress. Last thing I'll mention, last Friday there was a big vote in the House of Representatives on a bill called the HEROES Act. And it is the latest effort by at least our House of Congress to make our next commitment to the national response. And the big centerpiece of it is a lot of funding for state and local government. We think that is maybe the most urgent need right now, in addition to continuing to support small business, because it's very hard to reopen the economy when you've got frontline services, whether it's public safety or infrastructure or sanitation or public education, when all of that is hemorrhaging and we're talking about massive layoffs and cuts just around the corner. Reopening doesn't work, especially with our schools. If you think about it, you all understand how important schools are to many people being able to actually do their jobs and go back to work. When their kids can't be in school, that creates chaos. And to make our schools safe, you can't do it if you're slashing our teacher ranks and our support staff. You actually are going to need more bodies in public education to make schools safe. They're going to need to adapt some facilities. They're going to need smaller classrooms. So providing that backstop financially for states and local governments is super critical for all of those reasons. But specific to small business, we did make some changes in the HEROES Act, or at least we proposed some changes that will now go over to the Senate, and the negotiation will continue. And those principally consist of some more set-asides for the smallest loans, some set-asides for smaller community-based lenders, more flexibility, so extending the period for 24 weeks for the PPP program, and making sure that it goes all the way to December 31st of this year. There's also some provisions to require mandatory reporting by the SBA on all sorts of information that we want to see. And then clarifying, I know some of your members may be interested in this, but clarifying the interaction between the Employee Retention Tax Credit and PPP loans to make absolutely sure that borrowers can take advantage of both of those, and also that this won't be taxable. And then finally, another $10 billion for idle grants, which have been very, very popular, and we've basically run out of funding for those grants. I'm happy to speak more specifically about the technical aspects of either that bill or other programs we've enacted. I think I'll stop there and see what questions you might have for me.
So why don't I get us started, Angela, and can you already start making a list of questions, and while I ask the first couple, and then we can open it up to the floor. How's that?
Certainly.
When we applied for our PPP, as did many businesses here, one of the things that was jarring, both as a citizen and as a business owner, is to notice that when the CARES Act was passed, it was very quickly rewritten by the SBA. And so I wonder if I missed something in civics class, whereby I wasn't aware that the SBA could write the law. And specifically, the CARES Act said that 100% of the loan could be used for any permissible purpose, payroll or rent. And then there's this interesting sentence in the SBA reg that said that the Treasury Secretary and the administrator unilaterally decided that's not what Congress meant, so they're going to cap it at 75%. And I'm just wondering, to be used for payroll. I'm just wondering, did I miss something? What's going on there? Did they thwart Congress?
You actually, you didn't miss anything. You correctly identified an agency rulemaking or guidance, regulatory guidance that is out of step with what Congress intended. So I'm glad you brought it up. The HEROES Act actually also eliminates that ratio rule that's basically been interpreted into the law by the agency and gets us back to that 100% flexibility.
So we appreciate it and all the help you can give. I mean, it's just speaking as one business owner among many here on the call. 10 weeks is very short, and the sooner you can get more or give us a horizon, something to plan on, it would be helpful. I'd like to real quick ask on a different spectrum question. What do you think of health? The big elephant in the room is how to open up, and should we have shut down? And there are different countries and states that have answered that question differently. And so I wanted to ask that topic in two ways to you. The first is, you know, as a very educated person, but also a legislator, do you think that the second district is moving fast enough to open? Is it too slow to open, or is it just about right, knowing that there's so many other states and countries on a different wavelength? How do we know that we're doing it right?
Yeah, it's a great question and a difficult one. I guess what I would say is the question at this point is not should we reopen, are we going to reopen? It's how you do it. And I am concerned about places that just want to throw all caution to the wind and go right to business as usual with people crowding into bars and concerts without masks. And, you know, I just think there are going to be consequences to that, and it will hurt people from a public health perspective. It will probably have some economic consequences for those areas, and it may put at risk the progress that places like our state and our region have really worked very hard to lock in, because people move around so very much. So none of us like the lockdown. None of us like this stay-at-home stuff. All of us want to get back to as much normalcy as possible. But I just think we've got to really listen to the experts and have a clear-eyed view of how we get there. It needs to be sequential. I believe that tracking and tracing will inform this. So as we begin to relax certain things, if we've got good tracking and tracing and testing capacity, we're going to find out pretty quickly what are the types of things that are, you know, presenting new outbreaks that are contributing to the spread, and then we can fine-tune the decisions we make using a risk-based approach going forward. But, you know, I'm all for carefully proceeding down this path of reopening, but the carefully part is really important.
Awesome. Let me take one bite at that apple, and then I'll hand it over to Angela, because I'm sure there are many, many questions. You may have heard or seen on Bill Maher, David Katz. I mean, what do you think of health experts like David Katz? He's associated with Yale, and there are others from Stanford who think that the vulnerable should be locked down, and the less vulnerable, like children, for example, should be free to go to school, and others should be free to keep their businesses afloat and their economy up. So it's kind of a two-track approach. Right now, it seems like we're painting with a broad brush, treating everyone equally, but folks like Katz say, let kids go to school, but let's take care of the vulnerable. What are your thoughts? And does the name David Katz, is that even bantered about in Congress?
That's not a name I'm familiar with, but I am familiar with this argument, and I have read some op-eds and other pieces that suggest that we can sort of relax with young people and with those that are in good health, and focus all of our protection on locking down nursing homes and things like that. I guess what I would say is I don't think it's that simple. The idea, of course, we've learned that nursing homes are a really vulnerable place because of the health vulnerabilities and because of the congregate living conditions. But the people that work there come and go, and they're young people. They are working multiple jobs. They're constant vectors for the disease. They go back to their own families. The idea that you can somehow only lock down old people or only lock down the medically frail just doesn't work. And, people live in multi-generational households, and everybody has a relative or a neighbor or knows someone that has some immunodeficiency. So, it sounds great to think that, oh, it's just really simple. We'll sort of do a hard lockdown on nursing homes and we can all go back to business as usual. It really doesn't work that way. And I've talked to a lot of experts who, they believe we can start down this reopening road and be smart about it. But it is really a false notion that we somehow just lock down nursing homes and the rest of us can go on with normalcy. And young people are absolutely vectors of this disease. So the idea that you just go back to crowded classrooms and that won't lead to a lot of spread, and yes, even some health complications for young people, it doesn't square with the science and the credible experts that I hear from.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Congressman. Angela, what do we have from the room?
We have some great questions. And the first one is, when we went into this current safe at home state, it was kind of by degrees. First of all, they said no gatherings more than 50. We went into this a little bit by degrees. Do you see us going out of it somewhat by degrees? And how soon do you see us reaching a state where 50 people can gather, no more than 50, 100 people can gather, 1,000 people can gather? Will it be this year?
Well, I'm way beyond my political science degree when I invited to opine on epidemiology and things like that. But I can share with you, some of the thinking that I hear from people who do know what they're talking about. And what I am hearing is that we are a long way from the things you would need to see before you allow truly large, crowded gatherings. A year or two would be a reasonable expectation at best. And that's assuming you get a vaccine. But herd immunity is a distant prospect. You got to get north of 50, 60% of the people developing the immunity. We still don't really even understand what immunity to this virus even looks like. And then you got to have a vaccine, and we hope that we'll have one. But all of the hype and promotion from the White House and the world does not give you a safe and effective and universally available and affordable vaccine. There's just a long and difficult path between now and actually making that happen. So I think we've got to be clear-eyed about this. The downside of this make-believe invitation that so many people have for us, to ignore the consequences, pretend you can go back to crowded concerts, et cetera. The downside is really significant, and none of us want to go back into a hard lockdown. None of us want to go back into some of those worst case modeling projections where you've got millions of deaths in this country and where the healthcare system crashes. So this is a very high stakes and critical moment where we have to do our best thinking and listen to our best experts.
So I have another question for you, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about, the tracking and the testing for this. Is that helping? Is it going to continue? How expensive is that? The IJ had a really interesting article. Some patron actually paid for the testing of everybody in Bolinas.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really curious. It's not cheap right now, and it's just a snapshot in time.
Curious is a good charitable word that you're using for that testing. I had real mixed feelings about that. Congratulations to the good folks in Bolinas that they got to have not only a free diagnostic test, but serology testing. And maybe there's some value working with UCSF to the data set that they produced. I'm willing to assume that may be the case, but we weren't testing in nursing homes where people were dying. And we weren't testing with all of our frontline healthcare providers where people are dying and exposing others. So the inequity of that and the elitism that it's sort of smacked of just, I don't think sits right with a lot of people. We continue to be really short on testing. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. And I hope that some of these new, for example, saliva-based tests that sound like they can be done much faster and much cheaper. I hope that is just, I hope the private sector will be able to deliver this to us at the scale and volume that we're going to need. But I am one who believes that the federal government should have long ago invoked the Defense Production Act to commandeer manufacturing for, collection equipment like swabs and other things, PPE, and the manufacturing of the testing itself, to make sure that we weren't 3 months into this crisis still, racking our brains about how to fix the shortage. It's just unacceptable.
Well, that's awesome. That gives us a little bit of a snapshot. And it sounds to me like what we're doing is we're really looking at long-term support. And, this is no longer just a shutdown situation. This is long-term planning and thinking and lots of considerations in doing this by degrees as we move forward.
I think that is the correct premise to be operating under right now. I really wish I could tell you we're about to flip a switch and get all the testing capacity and all of the therapeutics and a quick vaccine by September. Realistically, I think these things are very unlikely. And so the tools that we do have that we know work are social distancing and hygiene and face masks and the other things that you know about. And we've all just got to be very, very carefully as we proceed.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jared. We are so happy to have you back. It's good to get up-to-date, accurate information from some of our leaders.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, sir.
And Ulrika, I think it's time for another poll. And everyone who shared questions,